A silent and massive storm is about to break out in the Middle East. The US now wants to completely change the equation of the Iran crisis. The focus has shifted to the Strait of Hormuz. Next-generation amphibious warships, heavily armored elite marines, stealth strategic bombers. They have all set sail and are approaching with unwavering determination. You'll be astonished when you learn what this unprecedented military armada will do in the region and how it will shake the balance of power. Because they didn't set out merely to deliver a diplomatic message or conduct patrols. They have also taken on the mission of unlocking the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian mine-laying ships, small boats, and missile and drone launch pads along the coastline. They are all now targets. Donald Trump called on NATO to eliminate these threats in the strait much more quickly. He stated that the alliance must assist, or they will face a grim future. However, when the requested naval support from allies went unanswered, Trump pressed the button with this historic move. This wave of destructive force, ignited by Trump, serves as a stark reminder to the crumbling regime. Any move Iran attempts will face a far greater and disproportionately destructive response from the US. Shortly, we will explain in full detail how elite American infantry plans to seize the heart of Iran's economy without firing a single shot. But before we do that, let's delve into the very center of that massive ring of fire awaiting Iran in the Strait of Hormuz. What lies ahead for Iran in the coming days? The USS Gerald R. Ford and USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier strike groups already stationed in the region were, in and of themselves, floating armies. It is claimed that the USS George Bush, as the third aircraft carrier, is in the process of being deployed. However, the decisive decisions made in the Pentagon's war rooms have elevated Operation Epic Fury to a far more strategic and results-oriented phase. On Friday, March 13, 2026, U.S. Central Command issued an additional request regarding this massive naval force. Wall Street reported that a massive amphibious task force departing from Japan had been directed on a route straight to the Middle East. At the center of this fleet is the amphibious assault ship USS Tripoli, accompanied by the warships USS New Orleans and USS San Diego. On the steel decks of these ships are 2,500 elite Marines specially trained to land directly on shore. Known as the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, this special force has set out to carry out the world's most critical amphibious landing operations. The sole purpose of this massive fleet is to place the Strait of Hormuz, the lifeline of global oil trade, under an absolute security cordon. As we all know, the Iranian side has made highly risky moves in this strait, through which 20% of the world's oil passes. In recent weeks, the Tehran regime has carried out asymmetric attacks on civilian oil tankers sailing around the Strait of Hormuz. Since the war began on February 28th, Iran has targeted around 20 commercial ships and tankers in the region. In this way, they have disrupted the global supply chain. This wave gained momentum again, particularly between March 13th and 16th. 5 more ships, mostly massive tankers, were struck. Due to Iran's asymmetric actions, maritime traffic in the Strait of Hormuz came to a near standstill. Global oil prices then began to rise rapidly. The Tehran regime was attempting to disrupt global energy supplies using kamikaze drones and fast attack boats. However, Tehran's strategy has now reached its red line. There is no longer just an air-based force facing the regime. There are elite marine infantry units capable of landing directly on the ground. But the US Navy and Marine Corps are not the only deterrent forces for Tehran. Trump simultaneously ordered a far more strategic and extensive deployment in the skies. We have now reached the point where the air power roar of this massive blockade alert against Iran is in full swing. As part of Operation Epic Fury, the U.S. Air Force's 3 most strategic bombers took to the skies simultaneously: the B-52, B-2, and B-1. These bombers have carried out critical operations. According to open-source data, there are currently between 28 and 32 massive heavy bombers in the sky, with their course directly set toward Iran. This may be the first time since World War II that such a large fleet of bombers has been seen. However, these aircraft are not merely flying around. They are on duty 24/7, seemingly to eliminate all of Iran's strategic targets. They have carried out very important operations since day one. As you may recall, on the first day, 4 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers took off from Whiteman Air Force Base in the U.S. state of Missouri. These aircraft had locked onto their targets without being detected by radar. Now, due to the impact they've created, the number of these aircraft has increased significantly. Between 12 and 15 supersonic B-1B Lancer aircraft took off from RAF Fairford in the United Kingdom and Ramstein Air Base in Germany. These aircraft form the fleet's fastest strike force. They are accompanied by 6 to 8 legendary B-52H Stratofortress Giants, taking off from RAF Fairford and the Minute and Barksdale bases in the US. In particular, between March 13th and 16th, this force and massive air fleet targeted Iran's deepest and most heavily fortified underground facilities. B-2 Spirit aircraft neutralized nuclear facilities and ballistic missile silos carved into the mountains in Talagan, Fordo, and Isfahan. In these operations, 30,000-pound GBU-57 MOP bunker-busting bombs were used, capable of penetrating hundreds of meters of concrete and rock. The shockwaves created underground rendered Iran's multi-billion-dollar underground facilities inoperable within seconds. The disabling of these facilities does not merely signify a physical loss of munitions. It also paralyzes the country's command and control system. The Revolutionary Guard's command and control network has been disrupted. Troops on the ground have largely lost communication with headquarters. Left without coordination, Iran's military units cannot mount an organized resistance against US air power. At the same time, B-52 bombers are disabling air defense systems with their JASSMER missiles, thereby making the sea safer for approaching ground troops. However, the US's deterrent presence in the skies was not limited to massive bombers striking from high altitudes. The Washington administration announced the transition of the war to a hybrid phase on both land and sea. It also deployed A-10 Thunderbolt II aircraft to facilitate this transition. These heavily armored aircraft, nicknamed Warthogs, became the operation's most active tactical strike force with CENTCOM's official approval. Taking off from Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates, these aircraft have already conducted over 150 sorties with tanker support. Unlike the B-2 or B-52, which can penetrate mountains, the Warthogs adopted a different tactic. The A-10s operated at very low altitudes to directly eliminate asymmetric threats on the ground. In particular, between March 9th and 16th, they launched a meticulous operation along the shores of the Strait of Hormuz and in southern missile fields. Iran's fast attack boats, swarms of kamikaze drones, and militia elements along the southern coast were the primary targets of these aircraft. They were equipped with 30mm GAU-8 cannons, Maverick, and APKWS missiles. With these weapons, they neutralized Iran's mobile forces at sea. The A-10's operations neutralize any elements capable of posing an asymmetric threat at sea before they even leave the coast. These aircraft operate side by side with advanced F-35s and F-16. They are securing, step by step, the shores where there is a possibility of amphibious landings. So far, we have witnessed how Washington has encircled the Middle East both from the sea and the air. But this massive encirclement initiated by the US does not appear to be limited to its own national military forces, because there is already a massive European naval force in the region. We are talking about a massive fleet operating in the Eastern Mediterranean. They are growing stronger by the day. There are currently more than 15 massive warships detached from some of Europe's most powerful navies stationed between the coasts of Crete, Cyprus, and Syria. Led by the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle, France has effectively formed a steel shield in the region with the frigates Chevalier Paul, Languedoc, and Alsace. This massive French naval force of 10 vessels is accompanied by 2 fully equipped Mistral-class amphibious assault ships. Spain's Cristobal Colón, the Netherlands' Evertsen, Italy's Federico Martinengo, and Greece's Kimon frigates are all part of this coalition. The United Kingdom, meanwhile, has deployed the Type 45 class destroyer HMS Dragon to the Eastern Mediterranean, putting the final piece in place for this seamless network. We are facing a very large multinational naval force, aren't we? The US amphibious force and this European fleet in the Mediterranean can operate in coordination. What these forces are capable of will likely deeply unsettle all of Iran's regime officials. This combined superpower will not only patrol the seas, but could simultaneously render all of Iran's strategic military facilities on land inoperable. This joint fleet is supported by Tomahawk missiles and F-35 fighter jets. It could completely neutralize Iran's main naval bases in Bandar Abbas and Chabahar within seconds. Currently, the US has been aggressively targeting these regions since the clashes began. These operations were also supported by Israeli strikes. As a result, Iran's ports have effectively become unusable for any naval operations. Now, with this superpower alliance, the Tehran regime will have to look to its own shores. However, it may not even be able to find a single suitable pier for any Iranian Navy vessel to dock at. Additionally, Revolutionary Guard coastal radar stations, air defense batteries, and critical drone launch pads could be completely wiped out within this perimeter. This unparalleled combination of forces is a flawless scenario designed to redraw the geopolitical map of an entire region. While all these plans are being meticulously executed on the ground, the US military has actually already pressed the button on that critical operation that brings the clashes to their final stage. On the night of Friday, March 13, 2026, Karg Island, known as the heart of Iran's economy, became the target of an unprecedented operation. However, the key point here is not the intensity of the attack on this island. What truly matters are the massive strategic implications created by this operation. During this delicate bombardment, which lasted for hours, more than 90 critical military targets on the island were neutralized within seconds. Deeply hidden sea mine depots, underground missile silos, and strategic naval bases belonging to the Revolutionary Guards were taken out of commission. The truly remarkable detail of this operation, however, lay in the incredible surgical precision demonstrated by the American missiles. In this massive military intervention, no damage was inflicted on Iran's multi-billion-dollar oil terminals, massive storage tanks, or pipelines. The US military deliberately and meticulously chose to protect these massive oil facilities on Karg Island, because there may be a far more strategic plan on the Pentagon's table. It is likely that this plan will be executed through the oil facilities that were left intact. This is precisely where the true purpose of the 3 amphibious assault ships heading toward the region and the 2,500 elite Marines we mentioned comes into play. This section is very critical. Please listen carefully, because for the first time, we may witness a different approach alongside airstrikes targeting Iran. Karg Island's air defense has been completely neutralized, and its military garrison has been dispersed. In this state, the island could become a potential target for elite Marines. This strategic island alone accounts for 90% of Iran's oil exports. There is a possibility that this area could be brought under control through a potential amphibious landing by the Marines. The US aims to physically secure the oil infrastructure. It is believed that the Marines plan to secure these facilities without firing a single shot. If this scenario were to materialize, the lifeblood of Iran's economy could fall entirely under US control. The direct transfer of Tehran's oil exports under Washington's control would mean the regime is economically cornered. Given all these coordinated and strategic moves, it would not be an inaccurate analytical assessment to say that Iran has already lost this war on paper. Yes, Iran still possesses thousands of ballistic missiles and a full-scale drone fleet, including shaded drones. However, to use these weapons, launch pads, trucks, and suitable terrain and base areas are required. The US, on the other hand, claims to have already destroyed all these attack sites through heavy bombardment. In other words, the Tehran regime no longer possesses any force capable of projecting power at sea or in the air. The most striking aspect of this military cost assessment, however, lies with the regime's naval assets. According to USNI news reports, 95% of the Iranian Navy has been rendered combat ineligible since the start of the operation. It has been completely neutralized. Between 85 and 95 naval assets, including patrol boats, mine-laying vessels, and frigates, have been struck or severely damaged. Bandar Abbas, Iran's largest naval base, has literally turned into a ship graveyard. The regime's much-touted drone carrier, the Iris Shahid Bagheri, and the massive Iris Makran sank in these waters within seconds. 4 Soleimani-class warships, considered the backbone of the Iranian Navy, were completely wiped off the map in simultaneous operations. 16 critical ships tasked with mining the Strait of Hormuz were taken out of commission. In fact, another first since World War II occurred. An active Iranian submarine was directly hit by a torpedo, and sent to the bottom of the sea. Panicked by this unprecedented destruction, some Iranian warships sought refuge by fleeing into international waters. However, their escape plans failed. The Iris Dina warship, which attempted to flee as far as the waters off Sri Lanka, was sunk by a torpedo. Its 87 crew members were lost in the depths of the ocean. Other ships, meanwhile, took refuge in Indian and Sri Lankan ports. They found themselves in a position that effectively amounted to a declaration of withdrawal from the war. This loss of naval power signifies that Iran has weakened to the point where it cannot even defend its own territorial waters. Isn't it now much clearer why the US, Europe, and even Asian countries are prioritizing their navies to resolve this massive crisis in the Middle East? For the Tehran regime, which no longer possesses a single ship capable of launching an active attack, this situation is more than just a loss. It is a scenario of collapse. In other words, it is evident from every aspect of the field that things are not going well at all for Iran. We are facing a state structure whose navy has been sunk and whose airspace has been seized.